are the books of the Bible chosen?
Well, God chose them. That's how.
So let's talk about that. If God stretched God's hand forth from heaven and chose them or wrote them personally, which Bible are we talking about? There are 310 million Orthodox whose Bibles are 79 books, 52 Old Testament books, 27 New Testament books. There are 1.4 billion Catholics in the world who have 73 books in their Bible, 46 in the Old Testament, 27 New Testament. There's 51 million in the Ethiopian Orthodox faith, which recognizes 81 books, 54 Old Testament, 27 New Testament. And there's 900 million Protestants with 39 Old Testament and 27 New Testament in their Bible. So which faith tradition did God choose the books for? Let me be upfront, and I say this with all due respect. What's considered divinely inspired completely depends upon the faith tradition that you ascribe to. But history shows us how the books of the Bible were chosen. Let's start with how the New Testament books were chosen, because the Old Testament is a bit more complex. But since the New Testament is the same in all these traditions, it's easier to start there. Let's address a big conspiracy theory right out of the gate. Some say Constantine chose the books of the Bible at the Council of Nicaea. But this crap conspiracy, it's been around for a long time, and we can thank the Da Vinci Code for this conspiracy theory's modern resuscitation. But that book ripped off 1982's Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was long on conspiracy theory and very short on evidence. And then there's Voltaire, who in the 18th century popularized a legend that the Bible was canonized in Nicaea by the bishops, placing all the known books on a table, saying a prayer, and saying which illegitimate texts fell to the floor. And none of that is close to being true. The actual process of selecting the New Testament's books took centuries. And there are letters that have survived from the early church fathers that prove this. It's a fact, not an opinion. It's a fact. And during the late 1st through 4th centuries, church fathers, they started debating which of the many books and gospels floating around were legit and which were spurious. And the use of the word books is wonky here, because what we call books were collections of letters and scrolls, parchments, yada yada, and they were assembled in codices. And the earliest fragments of these writings come from the early 2nd century, but late 1st century church fathers were writing about them. So we know a lot of them were around in some form late 1st, early 2nd century. And over time, books that were deemed authoritative by numerous individual church communities that used them came to be included in lists of accepted books. And early church fathers, when faced with something that didn't match up to what they had been taught from those that preceded them, they dropped that heresy bomb and toss them. Interesting note, the first known attempt at a canonical New Testament was the Marcionite canon around 144 AD, which was considered heretical. And I have a video about that, so look it up, because Marcion had some really interesting ideas. And supposedly in 170 AD, the Muratorian canon was produced, which was an early accepted list as well. But in the early 3rd century, Origen had his list of preferred New Testament books, about 21 of them. And then there's Eusebius, who, writing in the early 300s, provided an early list of which books were considered legit and which were borderline fugazi. And what's neat about Eusebius is that he broke his list into 4 categories: recognized, disputed, spurious, and heretical. Among the recognized were the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts, and Paul's epistles. Under disputed, Eusebius included James and Jude, 2 Peter, 2 John, and 3 John. And downright spurious and heretical, books like Thomas and Barnabas. But the earliest version of the eventual consensus New Testament canon didn't come until 367, when Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria, in his annual Easter letter, composed a list that's still recognized today as the canon of 27 books. Now, Athanasius is very interesting as well, but that's another video for another time. Let's just say he was one heck of a politician in a bishop's robe. And in 393 at the Synod of Hippo was the first time a council of bishops listed and approved a New Testament canon, which was similar to the modern Catholic one. But the debate over what was canonical and what wasn't didn't stop there and went on for a long time, into the 16th century even, when the reformer Martin Luther, the father of the Protestant Reformation, published his version of the Bible, and he moved the books of what he called the Apocrypha to a separate intertestamental section, and moved 4 books in the New Testament, James, Hebrews, Jude, and Revelation, to the back of the Bible because he thought that they were questionable. And later, Luther's, Tyndale's, the Geneva and the Bishop's Bible, and a couple of others, they would go on to form the basis of the King James Version as the KJV, that, according to the very editors of the KJV in its original 1611 preface, was to never set out to make a totally new, awesome, fantabulous, number one forever translation, but to make out of many good translations one principal, standardized one at the time. So why did some books make the canonical cut and others didn't? Overall, there were 3 criteria used by church authorities. The first was authorship, whether it was believed to have been written by an apostle, by Paul, or more importantly, someone close to them. Mark, for example, wasn't an apostle, but was believed to be an interpreter for Peter. We know Paul didn't write all the letters attributed to him, so it's believed that they were written by folks signing his authority, etc. Same thing with Peter, yada yada. The second criterion was antiquity, with older texts taking priority over the newer ones. And the third was orthodoxy, or how well the text conformed to current church teachings. And that last one's a biggie because current church teaching changed a lot over the first few centuries. And we must understand that in those first few centuries, well before the establishment of the official Catholic Church and all that stuff, Christianity, it changed a lot. I mean, look at how much it's changed over the last 200 years, am I right? But during those first pivotal centuries, there wasn't an overarching organization pulling strings. In these first 300 years, these churches were literally fighting for their day-to-day survival and debating which books would be the guideposts of their faith. As Christians, we like to imagine that God came down with his mighty hand and said, "These are the books of the New Testament." But that's not how it worked at all. These people were arguing and debating, praying and talking about which books had the mightiest of effects and pulled this New Testament story into a greater whole. The Bible is a collection of people's understanding of holy and divine experiences of God. It's a multi-vocal collection of books of many different cultures and different times, with its stories written over a period of 1,000 years. It's complex, layered, nuanced, and because of that, it's holy ground. It's where we come together, take off our sandals, and learn from others' experiences of God. But to run from its real history, or to stick our heads in the sand, or worse, just grab onto silly conspiracies floating around on the internet, well, that's just ignorant. Because this is how the books of the New Testament were selected. Now, was God instrumental in making sure those books were selected? Personally, I believe so, absolutely, because the fact that this book is even here is a miracle. But did he stretch forth his hand from heaven and write it himself? No, he did not. Did he take control of human beings and make them write whatever he did, like psychic automatons? No, he did not. But that doesn't mean that it's not inspired or God breathed, as the meaning of divine inspiration and God breathed is so much greater than what we've been told. And this stuff is important for Christians to know, period, because people perish for lack of knowledge. And because this stuff isn't talked about, it's why you see all these goofy and misinformed conspiracy videos on social media of people trying to stoke fear and thus clicks by putting out sensationalized videos about why books were removed, and all these silly myths about Constantine choosing the books, which is just garbage and not true in any way. So, I'll cover the Old Testament in another video coming up. And until then, God bless, and I'll see you soon.
Now, I don't always agree with Christians, but I do like this guy's video. The reason why I like this guy's video is because, unlike most Christians, he's willing to look at the true history of Christianity and how it evolved into what it is today. And the part that he is missing out on is that all of these evolved based on whatever the power structure, the military power structure was of that day, and who had political clout. So the fact that he still wants to believe that they're divinely inspired befuddles my mind. And many people leave seminary because they learn these things and they realize that this book is a man-made book created to control man by those who were in control at the time frame. And as history has moved and evolved, so has your book. And the fact that your book and your religion is different today than it was 200 years ago. I mean, I'm not in chains, so your book evolved to fit our current idea of how man and how society should be. This should be enough for you to walk away from this religion in truth, if you really understood it, because there's many books that are not part of it simply because of the political structure. So I don't even understand why that guy's still a Christian, but yet he is, even though he understands what's true and what's not. So hey, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is